Last summer for the Sacramento Kings was the summer of running it back. This summer cannot be the same. Monte McNair and Mike Brown have to get together this summer to make the changes necessary after 2 years of context to put together a roster that can better compete at the top of this very difficult Western Conference. On today's Locked On Kings podcast, I'll have grades for the two of them and their seasons that just concluded, and a grade for one of the few additions that they made last summer, Sasha Vezenkov. Was the Vezenkov experiment a failure? We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off-season long. This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store, and game on. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. The final three grades to give out in the end of this Sacramento Kings report card series that I'm doing here on Locked On Kings before tomorrow's NBA draft lottery, and we'll turn our attention to draft coverage and really, truly get this off-season started. I'm looking forward to that. After today, we can, for the most part, put this season that just wrapped up to bed. We'll still reference it and talk about it through the course of this summer, especially when it comes to decisions that the Kings need to make this offseason involving the context and involving the information that they've collected over the last 2 years with many of these faces on this Kings roster. So we'll still reference it, but this is really the last episode that we're going to in-depth focus heavily on last season, or at least that's the plan at this point. After this, it's looking forward. What moves can the Kings make through the draft, through free agency, through trades? What are they going to do this offseason to improve this team and get them back into the playoff picture in the Western Conference, and more importantly, get them to a contendership status in the Western Conference? A lot of that falls on the shoulders of two of the three guys that we're going to be talking about on today's podcast. The main one is Monte McNair, Sacramento Kings general manager. Now, his entire front office core is looped into this too, so it's like the entire Kings front office gets a grade, but Monte McNair, being the general manager, being at the head of it, the final ultimate decision maker, he's the one that gets the grade. And my grade for Monte McNair is very simple. It's a C. Now, before I dive into the reasons why I gave Monte McNair a C, I want to let you know that you can leave your grades at any time as well. I want to hear your grades for the three that we're talking about today. And if you've missed all my grades over this series, you can go back and check them out. Grades for De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, Keon Ellis, Davion Mitchell, and Trey Lyles. Those are all the grades that I've handed out leading to this point. Right? And if you want to share your grades, you can do so. Reach me on Twitter or X at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. But back to Monte McNair, I gave him a C grade, which is just straight average. To put it simply, running it back didn't work. Right? It didn't work. And a lot of you were telling me that it wasn't going to work last offseason when I was somewhat championing it. Easy for me to say. And I have no problem. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't feel like running it back was the right decision at the time. Based off the season that the Kings were coming off of, based off of the Western Conference being significantly less competitive last season compared to this season. And it was definitely competitive last year, don't get me wrong, but 48 wins was the third seed last year. The Kings finished with 46 wins and were a play-in team. I think the New Orleans Pelicans finished with 49 wins and had to beat the Kings in the final play-in team just to win the 8th seed. So the West was on a different level this year. Ultimately, running it back did not work. Hindsight is 2020, and you can say I told you so if I want. Ultimately, we now have the context of this full season and what happened this season behind us to where you're either proven right or proven wrong. If you think the Kings should have done other things last offseason, that's absolutely fine. And we'll see if they can correct those mistakes this offseason. But ultimately, they're in the past. Now, this grade goes back to last offseason, too, because those are when he made the majority of the moves for this year. So this grade, in essence, captures all of last summer, just like next year's grade at this time, or hopefully the Kings are still playing at this time next year, but next year's grade at the end of the season will involve this summer for Monte McNair. The offseason additions that Monte made were mainly Chris Duarte, Sasha Vezenkov, and JaVale McGee. I'm going to talk a lot more about Sasha Vezenkov in the final segment of this podcast when I give him his grade. I'm not giving Chris Duarte or JaVale McGee grades because this sounds harsh, but they're not really worthy of one. They didn't really do enough. If I was to give out quick grades for them, it would be like a D for both at best, maybe like a C- for JaVale McGee, and that's being kind. JaVale, his role was more as a leader in the locker room and on the bench more than actually on the floor. He started the season actually playing in that backup center minutes. Very quickly, we saw that those minutes should go to Alex Len, which, of course, eventually they did go to Alex Len. So, like, I give maybe a C- at best to JaVale McGee because of his leadership. Chris Duarte has been a very big disappointment, and I was excited about that addition. I know many members of the Sacramento Kings were very excited about that addition, and it hasn't panned out. It did not pan out at all this season. So ultimately, the additions that Monte McNair made this last summer, they didn't work, right? None of them really moved the needle at all. And again, we'll go more into Sasha Vezenkov in just a little bit. One of my biggest criticisms of Monte, and this is spoken from someone who is in the perspective, who has the perspective of, I'm not just a fan, right? So I'm not necessarily someone who is completely unplugged other than the things that I read online and my view from my seat at home or my seat inside the Golden One Center. But I'm not in the war room with Monte. I'm not behind closed doors. I'm not listening to the conversations. I'm not getting text messages from sources and members inside or around the organization about things that Monte's doing. So take everything that I'm saying as kind of a middleman and trying to figure things out while having a pretty educated opinion. To me, there seemed to be a disconnect between Monte McNair and the roster that Monte put together and Mike Brown and the direction that he wanted to take the team. Now, I am not, and listen to me very clearly here, I am not speculating that Monte and Mike are not on the same page or there's any sort of friction or anything between the two, not even remotely the slightest, so do not take that out of context, and it is on you now. If you take it this way or start running with it or saying something like that on social media, that's on you, and that's your fault. Has nothing to do with me, because I'm making it perfectly clear to you I don't think there is a disconnect between Monte and Mike and how they're working together and what they want to do for this team. I don't believe that at all. There's no reason to believe that. However, I do think that Mike Brown clearly wants to take this team in a more defensive direction, but he's doing that with an offense that has been, or with a roster that has been primarily constructed of offensive first talent. That was a conversation that we were having coming into this year. So to me, so much of this offseason too is about finding the guys from the last 2 years that you want to commit to and you want to run with and you believe that you can win a championship with, and doing a better job of surrounding those guys with pieces that more fit the mold of what Mike Brown wants to do or how Mike Brown wants to win. That's where I think if there's a disconnect, it's between Monte's roster and Mike's idea of how he wants to play. And we'll talk about Mike and how much he should be adapting those ideas to his roster in the next segment when I give his grade. I give Monte credit. Monte has stayed patient primarily throughout his tenure as the general manager of the Sacramento Kings, but he's also not been afraid to make big moves. Of course, the Tyrese Halliburton trade to go and bring in Domantas Sabonis. Of course, the trade to land Kevin Huerter a couple off seasons ago, right? Like, Monte has not been afraid to make some moves. But Monty, over the last couple of years, has really erred on the side of patience after the big Halliburton trade to kind of trust and believe in what the Kings were building here and get as much context as he can possibly get from 2 seasons before making another big change if necessary. It's clear that Monty values assets and is not a knee-jerk reaction general manager to make a move that could hamstring the future of this organization in order to put a Band-Aid over a problem short-term. That's not the kind of GM that Monty is. That being said, there is such a thing as being too patient. So patient that you can be left behind. And Monty said in his own words at the end of the season, in his end-of-season press conference, this team is built to win right now. Well, so are 10 minimum other teams in the Western Conference, built to win right now, trying to win right now. That means you still got to keep building. This team is not good enough, clearly, as it stands. Even if they are capable of winning right now, they're not good enough to win at the level, or this roster is not good enough to win at the level that the Sacramento Kings want to be at. That's very, very clear. Monty decided to stay patient through the trade deadline. Ultimately, other teams in the Western Conference made some moves. The Dallas Mavericks are the biggest example. They made some big moves, and here they are, not just playing in the second round of the playoffs. They're up 2-1 over the number 1 seed Oklahoma City Thunder after their win in Game 3 tonight. So the Dallas Mavericks look like a completely different basketball team after making some important moves at the trade deadline. Again, I am not in the Kings war room. I'm not on the phone with Monte McNair. I don't have the Kings phone lines bugged, so I have no idea how the conversations went. I do know that he was involved in certain conversations for certain guys, and we all know about the Pascal Siakam sweepstakes that fell through, and it's pretty widely understood that a large reason why was because Pascal wouldn't commit to re-signing with the Sacramento Kings. So again, Monty wasn't willing to trade away the assets to get Pascal Siakam, only to have him for a 1-season rental. So there's a balance between going for it and patience. And if it was in the best interest of the Kings for Monty to remain patient over these 2 years and over a couple trade deadlines, I get it. But I think that patience has run its course. I wanted to give Monte McNair a better grade simply because of Keon Ellis. Even though Keon Ellis was a decision a handful of off seasons ago, a couple off seasons ago when the Kings drafted Keegan Murray, Keon he blossomed this year, right? And became one of the greatest stories, not just in the NBA, but of course one of the best stories of the Sacramento Kings season. Monty deserves credit for that, for finding a diamond in the rough, undrafted player that came in and made as big of an impact as Keon Ellis did for a good basketball team in the Sacramento Kings, giving you big minutes in important games down the stretch. So Monty gets credit for that. But it doesn't, of course, outweigh missing the playoffs and ultimately this running it back strategy not working out. So Monte McNair gets a C grade for me. I don't know. I mean, it's bang average. I don't know if you think that's too high, too low. You let me know. You share your Monte McNair grade with me. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Look, skip all the you-know-what. Let's get right to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in your way of financial freedom. With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. It's actually achievable, and Yahoo Finance wants to help you make that dream a reality. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need in one place. They are the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets great investors apart, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. That's yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. So we got Monte McNair's grade out of the way. Let's talk about Mike Brown's. Now, of course, Monte being a general manager and part of the front office, Mike Brown being the head coach in the front of the bench. these guys are graded differently. Although I see them and they work hand in hand, right? It's the front office's responsibility to build the roster. It's Mike Brown's responsibility to take that roster and try and do the most he can with it. But Mike Brown has been from day one, very, very open about how he wants the Kings to play, and more importantly, how he believes the Sacramento Kings have to play, or the foundation of Sacramento Kings basketball has to be with a steady physical presence on the defensive end if this team wants any hope of truly competing for a title. And if that's not what you're playing for, what the heck are you even playing for? Right? Mike has made it very, very clear that being a solid defensive team doesn't mean you have to be crap on offense, but being a solid defensive team is what it is going to take for the Kings to ultimately get to where they're trying to go. And look at what is happening in the NBA playoffs consistently right now. He's being proved right. Look at the scores of these games. Many games finishing without even reaching 100. Neither team reaching 100. Most of these games finishing in the low 100s. A handful of games every now and then we'll get into the 1-teens. A couple of them will break 120. But it's not the same scores that we were seeing the first third to two-thirds of the season period where teams were dropping 120, 130 points on any given night, right? Mike has been very, very clear that you have to be a solid, steady defensive team because that is something that you can control every single night when you step on the floor. But he just doesn't really have the roster to be that yet. However, I gave Mike Brown a B- because even with this team missing the playoffs, even with this team winning 2 fewer games, granted they dealt with a lot more injuries this season than they dealt with last season. I'm not using that as an excuse. That's just a reality. They made significant strides on the defensive end. We all saw the defense that the Sacramento Kings were playing with through the final third of the season. And I asked Mike Brown at his end-of-season press conference, I asked him, hey, how sustainable is the way that you are playing defense to end the season? How sustainable is that through a full 82 games and into the playoffs next year? And Mike said, we're very hard on ourselves. We feel the pressure, but we firmly believe that everything that we're doing is sustainable. Now, he needs, I think, roster improvements and better personnel to take that sustainable defense to an even higher, greater, better level, right? That's what I feel is the next step for him in that sense. I do still think that there was too much of a sacrifice on the offensive end. Now, let me be perfectly clear to you because I know this for a fact. Mike Brown did not say, screw the offense. We're only focusing on the defense. He didn't do that. He was still heavily working and focusing on the offense, especially when the Kings were going through their ruts offensively this year. It's not like he came into this season after the Kings were number one in the NBA in offense last year, scoring 120 points per game, and said, screw all that, we ain't doing that anymore. We're only playing defense, and you can miss wide open threes now. It's not what Mike is saying at all. Now, Mike was very stubborn sometimes, in my opinion, of sticking with the spray threes or taking a lot of three-point shots, and there was an over-reliance for the Sacramento Kings offensively on three-pointers far too many times, in my opinion, this season, something that the Kings have to correct overall with their offense next year, although Mike has made it very clear, too. I'm never going to yell at my players for turning down an open shot. He has, whether you want to call it like a belief in the basketball gods or not, he's very firm and set in the mindset that if you turn down open shots, you will be punished for it. So that's the way he feels with kind of his three-point shooting and his mindset on that. But I do feel like the defense definitely improved. He deserves credit for that defensive improvement. But the offensive drop-off was a little bit steeper than expected because had the Kings played with the defensive level that they played with the second half of the season, air quotes, second half of the season, really final third of the season, and had, I'm not saying 120 points per game like last season, but had they gotten similar levels of that offensive execution, especially the pace that they were playing with, to where maybe it was 110, 115 points per game, Sacramento should have won 50-plus games this season. They should have. Like, if you were to have told me at the beginning of the season, Matt, the Kings defensively would have been in the middle of the pack, which is what I was calling for. The Kings need to get to the middle of the pack, and they will be really, really set. They got to the middle of the pack defensively. Unfortunately, their offense also dropped to the middle of the pack. The goal is to get both of those in the top 10. That's the next step for Sacramento, and obviously personnel changes, roster changes need to be made in order to get there. I do feel at times that Mike mismanaged some of his rotations. Some of his rotations were confusing. His lineups were weird. But I also think that, in a sense, was a message to Monte McNair of, hey, I'm looking for something. I'm searching at this point. I'm throwing these guys out there to see who's going to give me something because what we're trying to do is not working. I don't have the guys to play the way that I want to play. So I don't think, again, it's not like a jab at Monte, but it's, I'm going to put guys out there and search for what I'm looking for. Monte knows what I'm looking for, and he can clearly see what the roster is capable of doing and what they're not capable of doing, the roster that Monte put together, right? So, to me, some of those mismanaged lineups or questionable lineups were, in a way, needed to give us the context of what the Kings need to do this summer. Now, I do feel that one of the biggest areas where Mike failed this year is managing Kevin Huerter. I felt that from the beginning, Kevin Huerter's confidence was rocked. And I think Mike unintentionally had a large portion, a big part to do with that. I'm not at all saying that Mike verbally tore Kevin down or made Kevin feel like he was the problem or anything like that, because I know that's not the case, because Mike is a great players coach, very well respected in that locker room, so I'm not insinuating that at all. But the way Mike twice in the preseason and during the regular season kind of knocked the confidence of Kevin Huerter, who, to be fair, was not living up to the expectations or the needs defensively that the Kings are trying to set on their entire roster. Kevin wasn't living up to them. Mike went to Chris Duarte twice. And Kevin, on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, never really looked like himself this year. I'm not saying it's Mike's fault because of that, because Kevin has to take a boatload of responsibility too, which I know he is. But I do feel like it could have been better handled on both sides, and Mike could have done a better job of managing the roller coaster of a season that Kevin Huerter had. I also do feel like Mike, in some ways, misused Harrison Barnes. Harrison came into the season with a very, very, I think, difficult role. The fifth guy on offense, on a fluid offense that does not run plays. They have their dribble handoffs, and they have the way they want to play, but they play a very free-form style of offense. If they do draw up plays, it's typically for some of their top guys, or a Keegan, or a De'Aaron, or to some extent. And Harrison is kind of left to float and fill. The first half of the season, Harrison disappeared far too often. Again, I'm not putting that all on Mike and the Kings coaching staff and giving Harrison the pass, because he has to be more impactful, period. But I think it was clear around midway through the season, the Kings decided to go away from some of that and get Harrison a little more involved, and Harrison suddenly started having better games and being more impactful and being more noticeable on the floor. So that's, I think, another thing worth bringing up. I still believe, because I'm seeing these criticisms, and I don't understand these criticisms at all, for people calling for Mike Brown's job, which is absolute foolishness. I still think he's 100% the right coach for the job. He still has 100% my full confidence. In reality, to where he believes the Kings need to get to be champions, and all I can do is trust in him because he's been there before, and I haven't. Where he believes the Kings need to get to, even though they missed the playoffs this year, even though they won 2 fewer games, even though short term it looks like and feels like they took a step back, I do believe the Kings made more progress towards where they're trying to go and what they're trying to be to actually legitimately contend this year compared to last year, where they were a really fun team and had this really exciting offense to get back to the playoffs. But Mike did not feel that version of the Sacramento Kings was ever going to be more than a first or second round playoff flameout. So I trust Mike. I'm going to continue to trust in Mike. He gets a B- grade for me this season. The defense definitely improved. The offense took a step back. This summer, it's about him and Monte getting on the same page. deciding which guys are the guys to keep going forward, hopefully getting Malik Monk back, and then filling the rest of the roster with guys that more fit the mold of how the Sacramento Kings and Mike Brown want to play going forward. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, like I said at the top of the show, is brought to you by Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much for you to get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade in with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Get cool new playing pieces for you to travel the board with. You can get hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you're going head-to-head against them and you're smashing their buildings or heisting their vaults. Oh yeah, there's different levels to Monopoly Go, more than just the classic board game. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you need and everything you win, or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on the Google Play or the App Store, and game on. Last but not least, the final grade to give out, the final player grade, Sasha Vezenkov. Sasha Vezenkov gets a D from me. Maybe I could have given him an F. I don't think an F would be fully fair because I don't think he was a complete failure as much as he was not the right addition for the Kings. I feel that Sasha Vezenkov has a ton to offer an NBA team. I do. And I'm hoping that it's here in Sacramento, if not elsewhere, that Sasha finds a way to carve himself out a consistent rotational spot. Because he deserves it. He's a good enough player. He's a freaking EuroLeague MVP, for God's sake. He can help you win basketball games. That being said, last summer, Vezenkov was the biggest addition this team made. And very quickly, it became clear that he was not going to be very impactful. Why? Because he did not fit where the Sacramento Kings were trying to go. Vezenkov provides so much of an offensive boost. The three-point shooting, undeniable. He is an instant offensive weapon when he comes into the game, and you see how quick that trigger is when the ball touches his hands, right? He is coming into a game and ready to get his shots up. But defensively, there are question marks. Now, me personally, I don't think Sasha Vezenkov defensively is as bad as he's made out to be, or as bad as his inability to break the rotation consistently suggested. I thought he was better defensively and had better defensive moments than he gets credit for. That being said, Vezenkov, I think, is a perfect example of what we spent so much of this podcast talking about, which is Monty's roster and Mike's direction not being cohesive. Sasha is very much Monty's roster kind of addition. Right? If Sasha were on the Sacramento Kings 2 years ago, when the Kings made that, or had that 48-win season, the dawning of the beam, Sasha would have been fantastic on that team. 100%. He would have been playing consistently on that team, because defense be damned. Now, where the Kings are trying to go, if Sasha comes back next season, and I think there's a fair chance to expect Sasha to come back next season, do you expect him to crack the rotation? Especially if the Kings do what they're supposed to do and go out and get pieces around his position. The Kings need threes and fours, wings that are more defensively gifted. Do you, honestly, right now, not knowing what the roster is going to be, right now, would you feel confident putting money on Sasha making the rotation next season based off of what you know from this first full year in the NBA? Not saying if you want him to, because I want him to, but do you feel confident that it will actually happen at this point? Confident enough to put money on it? I don't at this point in time. The question is, though, if Sasha does not fit Mike's plan, does Mike need to adapt his plan a little bit to involve a talented shooter like Vezenkov? Or is it on Vezenkov to work as you-know-what off this summer to more fit the role that he would have here in Sacramento? And that's $1 million question. I think that's something that Monte also has to figure out. I don't know if Sasha's going to have any trade value. I do know that teams would like to have a tall shooter, lethal shooter on the floor or on their roster. So I believe that Sasha could be used maybe to sweeten the trade. But the Kings aren't really going to get anything of, I think, significant value trading Sasha as the center of the deal. So gut feeling, Sasha is still going to be a member of the Sacramento Kings team going forward, and gut feeling is he's still going to have a hard time cracking the rotation at this point in time. Sasha Vezenkov gets a D grade for me this season. So far, it has not worked. It has not been impactful, and he is right in the middle of the disconnect, again, between Monte's roster and Mike Brown's game plan, or how Mike Brown wants to win. Love to hear your grades for these three, your grades for everybody that I graded, your thoughts on the disconnect that I've spent so much time talking about. Share them with me at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below if you're watching on YouTube. You feeling lucky? Tomorrow is the NBA Draft Lottery. I'll have a podcast episode for you reacting to the Kings, more than likely, getting the 13th overall pick. They have like a 93 or 94% chance of that, like a 3.3% chance of moving back to 14, and then a 3.8% chance, I think, of moving into the top 4 with a 0.8% chance of actually winning the whole lottery. They're going to end up with the 13th pick, right? And then we can dive into what do they do with that pick. So I'm looking forward to that episode. Hope you will join me then. Until then, my name is Matt George. Happy Mother's Day to all our mamas out there. Appreciate you so much. I can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.